Okay, so today I'm going to talk about scientific revolution, more specifically about Francis Bacon, René Descartes, and Isaac Newton. So, what was the Enlightenment? The Enlightenment age, or the Age of Reason, started between 1600s and 1700s, and it came up with the scientific revolution, which changed the way of thinking because it gave more logic and reason behind everything. In this age, from philosophers or thinkers that studied the reason behind every knowledge human mind contained, they thought there wasn't anything that human mind couldn't reach and their ideas soon spread. So many other thinkers liked the idea and thought it was true, and they followed and studied more about philosophy. Many other thinkers started appearing and they changed the government and society by coming up with natural laws, encyclopedia, natural rights, and others. In this age, there were three main great thinkers that based on the scientific revolution, which were Isaac Newton, René Descartes, and Francis Bacon. So, how did the scientific revolution impact the Enlightenment? The scientific revolution was a main part of the Enlightenment because it gave reason and logic to everything, as I said before, and it replaced old ideas with new ones. For example, um, if people thought that monarchy was the best governing way and monarchy was like the key governing way to govern a country, the thinkers came up with other ideas such as democracy, communism, etc. And they gave more logic and reasoning behind each governing way, and they came up with the best ones. So they changed like what people thought about things, and not just like vaguely and ignorant. Um, and it also benefited the people. For example, free and equal, which was a quote, it formed in the Enlightenment, and natural rights and the laissez-faire, which was businessing um, kind of law, which protected the people from the government interfering the businesses. It also impacted the study and research of nowadays. The Enlightenment helped us to think more thoroughly, logically, and reasonably. And the thinkers also changed the government more fairly and no prejudice. For that, they came up with a government governed by people, which is kind of used today as democracy. They voted and they chose the ruler. Um, so this is the images. In the right one, where there's two heads, it's showing that how it developed philosophically and mentally rather than technologically and physically. So I'm going to talk about more about no, I'm talking more about the thinkers. So I'll start off with Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was born on January 4th, 1643 in Woolsthorpe, in England. Isaac Newton was a physicist and a mathematician. He was one of the greatest mind of the Enlightenment. He was the one who developed the principles of physics. Newton didn't have a great childhood because his dad died 3 months before he was born, and he wasn't expected to survive. So he was very thin and not very healthy. So his mother left him to live with a minister, and he had to live in a farm with his grandmother. When he was 12, his mother came back to him with three more brothers. He then went to Cambridge and was fascinated with advanced science. At that time, there were a lot of philosophers. He read a lot of their books and read about the heliocentric view of the universe and agreed with that. And so he kind of pursued his dream, and later he became a teacher at Cambridge. He worked really hard and published a book and discovered about gravity. He published Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, and then finally he then died on March 31st, 1727. So this is two images of Isaac Newton. The right one is showing um, the heliocentric view, telescope, and behind there's a tree with the apple, which is said that he discovered gravity by the apple falling down. So the next is René Descartes. René Descartes was born on March 31st, 1596 in La Haye, France. He was extremely educated, but his teacher inspired him to go into mathematics and logic of the world. He's made it. this made him come up with the quote, "I think, therefore I am." It's really, really famous. And he was the youngest of the three children. His mother died when he was one, and his father sent the children to their grandmother, just like Isaac Newton. He studied in the University of Poitiers. He he studied logic, music, art, math, philosophy, medicine, and theology. He later then published discourse on the method of rightly conducting the reason and seeking truth in the science. He was more into science, philosophy, science, rather than just philosophy and math. Um, he was kind of different from Isaac Newton's interest, and because of it, it's known as the father of philosophy and logic, which talks a lot of it in the book. He had a daughter in Netherlands, but he never married a woman. He lived in Netherlands for 20 years as well because he could concentrate more with his works, and finally he passed away in Sweden, February 11, 1650. His thinking of combining mathematics, logic, and philosophy to explain the world led him to a thinking of dualism, matter meeting non-matter. So, um, more like, no, as an example, a meditation, like um, a mind world, like a dream kind of thing. And there's two images of Rene Descartes, and the right one shows his work of um, of science and math and philosophy. So the last one is Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon was born on January 22nd, 1561 in London. He was the Chancellor of England. Francis Bacon studied in the Trinity College and graduated there. He then worked for an ambassador to France, but later his father died, and so he had to go back to England. And because he was in a mission in France, so he had to go back to England. And because his father died, that left him very poor, and so he went to his uncle, but the uncle rejected him to give him a job in the in the government. So later, he luckily got a job in the House of Commons. He became a politician and later got accused of bribery and had to pay a fine and stay at jail for 4 days. But he got accused and he didn't really no, he didn't accept bribery. And after retiring, he pursued his passion, which was philosophy of science. This was between 1610. He pursued his dream of philosophy, which was philosophy of science. As he studied that, he sent a lot of letters to the government, personally to the Queen of advices, and published a lot of books which had one thing in common, that was change the old way of governing. And after he went back to science and performed a lot of experiments with ice, later he got a cold and died on April 9th, 1626. John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, which we talked about in class, got hugely influenced by him and showed it on their works and mentioned Francis Bacon. So there's two images of Francis Bacon. So what did the thinkers teach us? They teach us about the logic and reason. They didn't have the objective to change the world, but they solved their own problems in their own way, which Isaac Newton was, because he had a really bad childhood. He he studied a lot to keep his mind away, and then he like started liking philosophy and wanted to know how the mind worked, and he went more to mathematics and philosophy. Rene Descartes, he had a bad childhood as well, and he just he got influenced by his teacher and went to philosophy. And Francis Bacon as well. He got influenced by thinkers, and he was a politician, so he wanted a better way of governing, a more logical and reasonable way of governing. And they certainly informed people about their discoveries by writing books and sending letters. And mm, but it challenged the religion and the truth. The truth being um, not the actual truth, but the truth that people think it's true. So, for example, Um, if I say someone killed someone and it's a lie, the person that's receiving the statement that the other people killed someone, he thinks it's true, but it's actually a lie. So, for example, in that time, um, as I gave an example earlier, the people thought that monarchy was the best way, but then they came up with other governing ways. Yeah, and they changed the way of thinking, more philosophical instead of just doing whatever, thinking before acting, finding a reason. So um, not being like ignorant about things, and uh, practically they just gave more depth of knowledge and information about things. And each one of them had an impact on this. For example, Isaac Newton, he published a book about philosophy. René Descartes also published a book which talks about the reason of science. And finally, Francis Bacon, with his objective to change the old way of governing and come up with a more logical one. How did they impact our way of thinking? So they basically made us think more reasonably and logically. This was the age in which they didn't advance technologically, but mentally and philosophically. They changed the way of governing, the way society ran. Um, Practically everything with knowledge and the idea that there isn't one thing the human mind can't reach. It was an age of thinking, knowledge, etc. It still helps us with reasoning, such as in courts, and it supports fairness and equality. So they advance more educationally, and it helps us um, think more thoroughly. And for example, in a science experiment, instead of just finding out about something nobody cares, we find something that could help the reasoning behind things. For example, how humans became humans, and yeah. So this is an image about the Enlightenment. It's like a recapitulation. So my opinion on them, I agree with what they thought and studied about, because nowadays it is the basic of all learning. For example, in schools, it's what we learn, and it has now become a natural instinct to have the sense of logic and reasoning behind everything, such as advanced science, maths, and other studies, but also in simpler stuffs. For example, slavery, the unfairness people nowadays see looking back on that age. So it's a natural instinct to see it's unfair, to see what's fair and what's right and what's reasonable. So basically, I think they did a great impact on our present world and certainly back then as well. So this is my bibliography, and I'm done.